Hi, everybody. It's Joe Ridholm, Quirks editor, back moderating room one today. Hope you're enjoying this final day of the session so far. And if you'd like to tweet about the event, please use the hashtag QuirksVirtual. Our next session is on building an innovation pipeline. And our first presenter is Heather Christman from the Garage Group. Take it away, Heather.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today to talk about building an innovation pipeline for Barilla and the work that our teams did together. I'm Heather Christman. I'm a Senior Director of Lean Growth at the Garage Group. And with me, I have...
Hello, I'm Kit Burton. I'm a brand manager over at Barilla with responsibility for the Vasa brand and our snacks portfolio.
So today we're going to be talking to you a little bit more about our experience collaborating on building that innovation pipeline. First, before we dive in, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about how we approach this, and the backstory for that really is who is the Garage Group? What do we do? The Garage Group is really on a mission to help big companies get back to the garage floor, right? So a lot of our companies, great companies, in fact, were started in a garage when entrepreneurs and where entrepreneurs are really close to the consumer and the problem that they're trying to solve. And so at the Garage Group, we work with big companies to help them tackle their innovation and strategy challenges through the lens of an entrepreneur and to think more agile and put the consumer first in order to get back to rapid iteration and co-creating with consumers and really thinking about how to move quickly and drive forward good outcomes. So that is the backstory on how this will all frame up in our approach to our work as you think through and as we talk through what we did with the Barilla team. So today, our objectives really are four things. We are going to talk to you about the challenge that the Barilla team was up against. We'll share out the approach. Kit will do some digging in on the key enablers as he saw them in terms of how the approach played out and what worked for them. And then we'll share our results and lessons learned. And as we dig into this, one of the things that I want to have everyone keep in mind, right, since we did this work, a lot of things have gone 100% remote. When we did this project, I would say about 70% of it was completed in a virtual context to start with. That's just our way of working. But as you think through today, what we're talking through, I want to assure everyone there are a lot of really creative ways to drive this work forward in a virtual environment. And I want to encourage all of you who are responsible for driving forward innovation to continue to lean in with courage and to drive the work forward, even though there's a ton of uncertainty, and know, in fact, that there are many ways that this can be done really, really well virtually. So I'm going to turn it over to Kit, who's going to dig into kind of how we met each other and what the challenge is that the challenge was that Barilla team and the Vasa team in particular was facing for this particular innovation session.
Thank you, Heather. And I'm glad to be here and have a chance to introduce our project and our challenge a bit. I feel like things have come a little bit full circle as we actually met the Garage Group at a previous Quirks session. But to focus on our challenge in particular, we were given, if you will, the dream brief from leadership at our company, which was, a team pulled together with resources and the mission to recreate and refill the innovation pipeline for our Vasa brand within Barilla's portfolio. The only problem was that we were, along with those resources and great brief, we were also told to do this and be in market within 9 months, which meant that essentially all the tools and processes that we were used to using had to go out the window. They simply wouldn't be up to the task on that timeline. And what it forced us to do was really focus on the essentials and look for a partner who had a process and could bring us along the way. One thing we knew we absolutely had to get right was a focus on true consumer needs versus, as probably nobody on this call has ever experienced, looking at what you can produce and then trying to find a consumer who possibly might want that. We wanted to do the opposite and make sure that everything we were doing was rooted in a true consumer need.
When you think about that, Kit, I know you said that. Do you have any insight into what made leadership want to go so fast with this particular challenge relative to how you would typically approach this kind of work?
Yeah, that's a great question. At the time, I didn't fully see the picture of what they were trying to achieve with that timeline. But in hindsight, it's very clear that we were trying to make a shift, not only to fill an innovation pipeline, which every brand has got to do, but as a company, we were really trying to make a shift towards agile working and to get out of some of those old, letting the process drive what we did versus letting our needs, the needs of the business and consumer needs drive the process. So I think the timing was really a tool that leadership used to push us out of our typical way of working. And I think it also was an advantage for us because, internally as the project leader, having that kind of tight timeline allowed me to, of course, I myself had to introduce a new process, but it allowed me to push a lot of our cross-functional team out of their typical process as well and focus on the essentials. So as a marketer, the essentials for me were to make sure I had a really meaningful consumer insight to innovate around. But that same logic applied to, for example, the quality team who was working with us. They couldn't do their typical process. So we really had to focus on the essentials and what mattered. And then also be honest about those things that were nice to have and were comfortable, but weren't necessarily serving the consumer need or the business need of the project.
That's really great. It'll be fun to hear more about how this has played out and what stuck with the team as we move forward with this conversation. Perfect. So just as background again, part of how the Garage Group approaches things is through this define, explore, build, test, learn lens. And we leverage a multi-method approach. So we borrow from a lot of different thought leadership in order to say, what is the challenge and where does it make sense to leverage different tools at different points in the process as we're building out new ideas or new strategies for brands and teams. So where this all fell was largely in the define and explore, which is what you'll hear play out. And the Vasa team really took it forward and continued to build, test, and learn on it along the way. So this is just a really good snapshot to show you what the process looked like. So this was over the course of really a 5-week period that we engaged with one another. And the upfront was all done virtually. The Vasa team wanted to learn as they went. So bringing the team along, identifying the jobs with them, training the team on what jobs were, right? So for some of the team, there was familiarity. For others on the team, there was not. But then truly enabling the team to be partners in the process so that they would have the skill set, they would have the knowledge long after we were done working together. So in those first couple of weeks, there was a lot of training on how to talk to consumers, how to identify jobs to be done and pain points. There was a lot of conversations around how do you drive divergent ideation and thinking. And so the team got trained in how to find trends and analogs that would drive that kind of divergent ideation. And then we rolled into a 2-day session wherein we were leveraging consumer insights along the way. So you can see those little loops that we've got, the yellow and black loops. Those show different ways in which we interacted with consumers to get consumer insights to help us continue to iterate and refine and make sure that we were solving the right problems, but also then creating solutions that really were resonant with that. Kit, do you have any other builds on this or thoughts?
No, I think the one thing I'd add here is that as you mentioned, we really wanted to bring the whole team along through this entire process, and we had a cross-functional team that was working on this brief. So I'll pick on my procurement person who, to his credit, really jumped in and looked to learn a lot of things that were really outside of his expertise. For example, understanding what an ethnography is and how to talk to consumers. And I'll still remember the day when he, popped on the iPad and had to interview a consumer for his first time, and just the value of bringing everybody on the team through that consumer-focused process set us up for success during those last 2 days of iterative ideation.
That's great. Perfect. So Kit, we've done a lot of talking over the last couple of weeks about what really stood out to you as key enablers that helped drive this towards what seems to be success for you and the team coming out of this and getting into market as quickly as you were charged to. And so as we dove into these, we will share out more about these with you all, but the key enablers that really were forefront or top of mind were jobs to be done, which we started to touch on, cross-functional engagement, as Kit mentioned, iterative learning loops with consumers, and then just that speed of working like an entrepreneur and moving fast. So we'll dive into those individually and talk a little bit more about how those came to life and what they meant. So as we mentioned, jobs to be done really were at the forefront of what we did and how we set the stage to drive ideas forward that met consumer needs. You can see the process here. We did a knowledge share, a digital ethnography, and some desk research to really get at the insights, pain points, and unmet needs, which then drove us toward jobs to be done. That the team honed in and said, okay, which of these make most sense for this brand and where we want to head in the future, which ultimately drove us to our ideas that were rooted in solving for those jobs to be done. And Kit, when you think about jobs to be done as the foundation of this work, what is it about jobs that really you feel enabled the team to drive forward toward a good outcome? And how did that help enable that success?
Yeah, that's a great question, because jobs to be done was something that, I mean, we'd heard about, we were familiar with, maybe call it academically, but it's not something that we had put really at the center as much as we maybe should have in the past. So the job to be done for us, I think in the upfront was a huge enabler because it allowed us to really put on paper what consumer need we were talking about. And then it gave us a great yardstick to measure every one of our ideas against. You know, if we had what we thought was a really exciting idea, but it didn't match up well against one of our jobs to be done, it made it really, really easy to, to remove that idea or deprioritize that idea without it becoming a, we'll call it the hippo approach, right? Where somebody in the room gets to latch on and then the team has to follow. The jobs to be done really were an enabler of making sure our ideas throughout the process stayed focused on the consumer needs that we heard.
I think what's interesting there is even the team had more ideas that we whittled down, and as we made decisions around pivot, perish, persevere, we had gotten to where they no longer served those jobs, to your point, and it was neat to see the team almost sort of self-sort and say, is this really what we need moving forward? So that's great. The second enabler that we're going to talk about is cross-functional engagement. And I know I'm going to actually just turn this all over to you, Kit, to talk about your experience really leading this with a cross-functional team relative to what you have experienced in the past from an innovation approach.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. And I love this picture because you see smiles on those faces. When we were in the middle of the process, but it wasn't always smiles leading up to being comfortable connecting with the consumer in this way. So first, to touch on our historical process, I think probably similar to a lot of traditional food companies. We in the past we would start with consumer research. Out of that would come some insights. We'd work on ideation, usually over a period of months, where insights and marketing would come together and work on that. And then we would enter kind of the traditional stage gate process where the other cross-functional members of the team, like R&D, et cetera, would get involved. What we did this time instead was that innovation sprint approach that you see focused here. So the two individuals you see in this picture here are our procurement lead and then our sales lead. Two people who, in a typical staging gate process, wouldn't ever get to participate in the consumer insights or the ideation part of this flow. For them, they actually started with us from the very beginning, the same as the entire cross-functional did. So they participated in the digital ethnography, meaning they were responsible to listen to consumers walk through their kitchens, understand what they were saying, and then turn those into these observations that we would assess as a team. That prepared them for the in-person sessions where, as you see pictured here, we had consumers connected through FaceTime or Skype, and we actually got to interview consumers who we'd observed during the ethnography as well as additional ones, and ask them questions both about the jobs we'd identified as well as some of the ideas that we had begun to identify and ideate, and see how those measured up to them in a real way. What was great about this was that, again, because we were so focused on the consumer and had the cross-functional team there all the way through, Heather, as you mentioned earlier, it was almost like the team could see where the process needed to go. And again, as project lead, it wasn't me telling another cross-functional team that we had to move a certain way, and they could see it. They knew which ideas were matching up best with consumers. And because we were all aligned around that jobs to be done approach, it became very easy to steer the team down those paths that had the most resonance. The last thing I'll mention about this process that was so helpful from a cross-functional perspective is that because each of these cross-functional representatives on the team had experienced the consumer insight, it gave them a lot better proof, if you will, to go and sell back to their organization what we were going to try to do. They had firsthand the consumer knowledge and observation to sell in why we were asking, for example, the procurement team to do what we were asking. And that really enabled them with their own teams to go back and be more effective.
Well, and it's interesting. I remember the first day Ed came in and we had just, gotten together and we had walked in the room, and I just remember your team, everybody sitting around so excited, and they're repeating what they had heard consumers saying and naming them by name. And that was an interesting and really exciting way to see it come to life, was that the consumers really were at the forefront of folks' minds as they even came together to start the process in person.
We still talk about a few of those consumers by name, Heather, so they live on.
And you are not the first person from a team that has said that. Like, they have so-and-so, the consumer, just sort of like on their wall thinking about, what he or she would want. So that's great. The next enabler that we're going to chat through is just these iterative learning loops with consumers. And we've hit on them a bit in the conversation that we've had. But what it is it really creates, I know we mentioned build, test, learn as sort of the stage that comes after getting the ideas really buttoned up, or at least having a set of ideas. Really, we're building, testing, and learning throughout this entire process, right? And so jobs to be done was a way that we used consumers and talked to consumers as a way to get those jobs to be done and really understand what needed to be solved for, or what opportunities there were for consumers or with consumers. But along the way, it is really important to continue to say, how do we learn from consumers in order to make sure that the ideas that we are building resonate with them and actually are doing the job that we were setting out for them to do. And one of the important things as you think about that is it can help guide a team to make decisions and to let things go, maybe that they thought were top ideas, but consumers aren't seeing as being the best idea. And it can also help guide as it relates to thinking about how might you pivot this idea to better meet the needs of consumers. And so as we go through these learning loops throughout the process, we drive teams to really think about, how do you leverage this knowledge to pivot, perish, or persevere each of these ideas? And the real gem in all of this is you can start learning from consumers as soon as you start ideating. Instead of waiting until you've invested days or months getting ideas to a place where you feel really good about them and putting them in front of consumers, only to find out that actually it's not going to work, or it's not what consumers want. And so our big push is, if you can do something for lower cost, maybe it's a little less rigorous, and you have a smaller base size at the forefront, you can do some really great learning that can be just as valuable as waiting until the end, or waiting until you've got to invest a ton of money, or even investing a ton of money up front. Kit, do you have any builds on that or thoughts about that relative to this project?
The only thing I'll say here is that this ability to whittle, I'll call it whittle ideas really, really early, was one of the things that most attracted us to this process. Because again, we only had 9 months to get ourselves into market, and we didn't have time to build up the perfect idea, put it through a long testing process, and just to find out that we'd gone off track. So this, again, these quick check-ins with consumers, frequent check-ins with consumers, were essential to us to be able to meet the timing and to be able to focus our effort on where we knew it could actually pay dividends.
Yeah, absolutely. And our last key enabler was really this hustle like an entrepreneur. And you all heard Kit at the outset say, we had to get this done in 9 months. We had to be in market. And so when we think about what it means to hustle like an entrepreneur at the Garage Group, these are the 6 behaviors that we really encourage teams to adopt and see as sort of the backbone of how entrepreneurs approach their work in a way that drives them towards success. And I think really first and foremost, helping the team to fall in love with the problem and really focus on that drives all of the rest of these to come to fruition. And I know Kit's got a couple that were his favorite that he saw play out most strongly with his team that he's going to share with you all as a part of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. The couple I want to focus on here are, I think, number one, focusing on the why, and the consumer interactions, the digital ethnography up front. That gave us a really, really clear feeling throughout the entire team of why we were doing this, and that gave energy to everything that came afterwards. I think embracing the growth mindset is another where this required growth mindset from everybody on our team, me in particular, because it was a process I was unfamiliar with. And as a brand manager, I'm used to feeling like I know the process better than everybody, and I'm the master of this process. And this timing requirement pushed us outside of that. But for us, finding individuals internally who could embrace that growth mindset and who could help us all grow together was a key takeaway. And I think each of us who went through this process, we definitely do our jobs differently now, even when we're back in the phase and gate process, to really ensure that we're questioning, do we need to do this? Is this essential? And then making sure that we're able to take on uncertainty in a way that we weren't before. The last one I'll talk about here is that operating with urgency. We had the help from leadership to have to do that. But even getting beyond just the leadership push, once we felt the why, once we had the excitement of growing and learning these new tactics that were paying such dividends for us quickly, I think that encouraged us and gave us the confidence to take urgency into other parts of the process as well, and to continue that even beyond the sessions and the process we worked through with your team, Heather.
That's great. So we must know, the audience must know, because I know that it's already been spoiled for me. But as we think about the results and the lessons learned from this, where's the team now? Where are the ideas now? And how did things end up, or how are things ending up?
Thank you, Heather, because that is the $1 million question at the end of all this, right?
It's the $1 million question, right?
Yeah. So, for us at Barilla, we looked at this process, and overall, even after we finished our engagement with the Garage Group and moved into the actual market test, we looked at this entire process as a huge success. And looking specifically at the work that we did with your team, Heather, this quote from our head of global innovation, I think, really stood out to me and was so rewarding for the team. She talked about this rapid innovation process helping us stay connected to the consumer in a way that we at times struggle to do. I mean, this is not a new challenge, and it's not a challenge that's going to go away, but this process really helped us to do it. The last thing she said here was that the strength of consumer jobs identified and the continual focus on them makes me much more confident we're bringing real value to the consumer. And as project lead on this, this last half of her statement really stood out, because in so many times through this process, I was taking what we were doing, these ideas, these new products we were going to put in market, to leadership we were proposing some things that were outside of the box. And I wouldn't have been successful in those conversations without the clearly identified jobs to be done that I could point back to. There's so many meetings where it was turning into a hippo kind of decision, and I could steer that right back to the consumer. And I was enabled to do that because of those jobs to be done that we worked on. So where is the project today? We went from the 200 plus pain points you see here. We had the prioritized jobs to be done. We had 12 top ideas. I'd like to say that all 100 and something of our ideas were top ideas. They were not, but we had 12 top ideas. We ended up taking 3 of those into a market test, and we saw a lot of success and resonance with consumers in market. And again, it's been a huge success for us where we've been able to fill our innovation pipeline for the next 2 years. We've been able to generate learnings both on the consumer jobs as well as in-market learnings that we built from those that we just wouldn't have been able to do in a typical process and our typical way of working.
I think it's so exciting, and it's been exciting to catch up and keep up with all of this as it's unfolded, because certainly the team had so much passion for the ideas coming out of it, and it's great to see them, drive to success, and for you all to get to see them come to fruition in your pipeline. I think one of the things that bears mentioning is you mentioned at the beginning of this that you found out about us at probably 2 quirks ago, and or maybe it was last year. It might have been last year, but anyway, I think I don't know what year is what year at this point, but I think the big thing is you all came to us and said, hey, you just used this with Kraft Heinz, right? So that was the partner we were presenting with. We don't have that kind of budget, right? Like we don't have that sort of engine here to be able to drive this. And how do we make something happen? And so this really was an adapted approach. And I think the big thing is having the courage to lean in and say, even if the resources look different, how do you still leverage the same principles to drive to similar outcomes, recognizing that it doesn't always have to be a one-size-fits-all. And I think you all had sort of the courage to ask us for that, right? And to say, how do we partner to make this work? And how does our team lean in to make this work? Which was awesome. And I think you all were just phenomenal at leading this forward. And it's been exciting to see how it all unfolded. Is there any, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I give your team a lot of credit as well, because we are the ones who came to you and said, we want the Cadillac on, I don't know, what's it, on the Toyota budget. So, and you worked with us to maintain, again, the essentials and make sure we had the process to get us there.
Well, and it's one last question that I have for you too is, as we look at, you've got these things that are sort of in test market. Are any of them coming out soon? Anything close to launching that we can expect to see at our stores? Keep your eye on the Bossa shelf. There are some exciting things coming down the pike. And I'll say the innovation that we're scaling up definitely would not have been, we wouldn't have built it this way without having gone through this process. It simply wouldn't have come out of our old jobs to be done, or sorry, our old phase and gate process. That's awesome. Well, I will be very excited to hop over and buy it. You know how much I love Vasa. So that's great. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation today. I think one other thing that I'll mention to everyone, we are going to put out a link in the chat for a session that we're going to be hosting with some leaders who have been driving innovation virtually and in a remote world. So if you have questions about how you even do this remotely, I promise you it is 100% possible. The teams smile as much as the team was here today and in the picture you saw of the cross-functional partners. So they have been really engaged and excited, and these leaders are excited to share with all of you how you can continue to courageously lean in and innovate in a world that maybe has a lot of uncertainty, but also, you know, has some challenges in terms of how things have historically been done. So if that is of interest, you can click on the link there. And that's all we have for you today. We appreciate you being here and listening to us. And as always, Kit, I so appreciate your partnership, and it has been so much fun to work with you on this project.
Thank you, Heather. It's been great to be here with you today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks very much. That was fantastic stuff. We've got a quick break before the next session. So check out the networking area for the event game. You can earn points and get a chance to win some great prizes. And we'll see you back here after the break.